Hi, Stephen. Let's see. So we are also live streaming, and I started the live stream. Stephen. Delay. I need to figure out. So we are also live streaming, and I started a live stream. Stephen. Delay. I need to figure out. Okay, test. Test. Bear with me. I'm testing on my end. Okay, I think I got myself together. We will begin in 7 minutes. And Stephen, I need to make you a co-host. Do that.
All right, it looks like that worked. It looks like I could theoretically share my screen now, so.
Okay, awesome. Everyone will start in 6 more minutes. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Happy Thursday. Um, this, so we have a popular topic, which is why we're also live streaming on YouTube. Um, this month's topic is Google Analytics tips and tricks for Drupal 9 and 10. This is really important, I guess, because most people had to migrate off of the Universal Analytics by July 1st. So this garnered a lot of interest. So thank you, Stephen, for being our presenter for this month. Before I hand over the reins to Stephen, I'd like to kind of go over some of the things that Drupal for Gov does. So most of you all are probably familiar with who we are, but if you aren't, we are a community of open source advocates, and we're interested in all things open source within the government. In addition to this webinar that we hold on every third Thursday at 3 o'clock, we have our global training days. We do the Gov Summit at DrupalCon North America. And what is really exciting is that this November 1st and 2nd, we'll be holding our Drupal GovCon conference in person. If you're interested in communicating with us, would like to hold a webinar, you can always reach us via our email at drupalforgov@gmail.com. We are also available on Slack and Twitter. We're also, although we found a place for this year, we're always looking for a place to host a half day or multi-day, like similar to Drupal GovCon. So if you have the space, please get in touch with us and let us know. We'd love to work with you with that. If you miss a webinar, we always upload these to YouTube. Of course, we're going live today, so it'll be available on YouTube. But we also reference that information on the Drupal for Gov webinar page on the website, the Drupal for Gov website. And last but definitely not least, I would like to announce Stephen Pashby as our speaker for today. He is an account manager at Design Hammer. He focuses on sales, account services, community outreach, program management, and providing accessibility, SEO, and usability consulting for Design Hammer clients. Outside of his work, he serves as a fencing referee. That's interesting, for the NCAA and USA fencing. And he lives in Durham, North Carolina with his wife and 3 cats. Welcome, Stephen. So happy to have you be our presenter for July. Thank you. I'm going to stop sharing so that you can take the reins.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. Go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. Make sure that looks like that's sharing. Excellent. So again, thank you for the opportunity, everyone. Looking forward to sharing some tips and tricks that we have run across for using Google Analytics for specifically in Drupal 9 and 10. So just an outline of what we're going to cover today. We'll talk about Google Analytics 4 in 5 minutes, try to really level set about sort of what Google Analytics 4 is. And then we will dig into how you get that on your Drupal site. There are a few different ways. We'll talk through some of the pros and cons of different ones of those. And then we'll get kind of into the meat of the talk, which is some gaps in GA4 and how to fill them. So looking forward to walking through some of the things we've learned. So as mentioned, I'm an account manager at Design Hammer. I've been working in Google Analytics for over a decade, and I oversee most of our implementations for analytics for our clients. And I missed a slide there. All right, so let's level set. I'm not a developer, so if you have, there are definitely potential technical questions that are more in depth than I can cover. So I will try my best to let you know if we run up against one of those. And I'll be showing you kind of some ways to address issues we've run into, but they're probably not the only way to do it. I'm assuming you've got some level of familiarity with Google Analytics and Drupal, and that you probably have already created a Google Analytics 4 property and potentially installed Google Analytics 4 on a Drupal site. So I'm also not going to go through the ins and outs of configuring a Google Analytics 4 property. All right, so Google Analytics 4 in 5 minutes. Start your timers, right? So what's Google Analytics? It's a free web analytics service offered by Google. It's at its base level, it's some JavaScript that you add to website pages. It was originally a service called Urchin on Demand. That was a previous service that Google purchased. And the first Google Analytics service was released in 2005. So there have been several different major releases since then. 2009 was asynchronous, in 2012 was Universal Analytics, and then 2020, Google Analytics 4 came out. When I started putting this set of slides together, well over 80% of websites who report a traffic analysis tool are using some form of Google Analytics. So it is effectively the market leader. Universal Analytics, which is the now riding off into the sunset Google Analytics 3, was initially released over a decade ago in October 2012. It was really a refinement of kind of the old Urchin on Demand technology. So, I mean, we're talking, well over 2 decades old technology here. And since it leveraged kind of this old data model, basically migrations from previous versions of Google Analytics to the new version were not particularly painful, and they were, so largely historical data was compatible. As you may or may not be aware, Google said that on July 1st, that just passed, 2023, Universal Analytics would stop tracking new data. Little asterisk. After July 1st, they said they're staging the end of collection. So if you have a Universal Analytics property, it may still be tracking, but you should assume it will cease tracking at any time. I did a little audit of properties we have access to, and about 20% have stopped tracking. They all stopped on July 1st, so not sure what the actual cadence is going to be for Google truly shutting things down, but we're past the point where they said they were going to shut it off. So you should assume that Universal Analytics is going away. The other kind of important aspect is Google's only committed to support access to Universal Analytics through December of this year. So after 2023, it's anyone's guess whether Google will allow access to that historic Universal Analytics data. So the big thing a lot of people ask is, how can Google cut me off from my years of Universal Analytics data? We like to say around here, if you aren't paying for the service, you are the service. So, there's no cost for Google Analytics, particularly for Universal Analytics. So Google is getting something out of that, largely access to your website's data. So the big kind of emergency takeaway is, if you have sites that were using Universal Analytics and you don't have GA4 in place, you are or likely are soon no longer going to be tracking data. So important to get that rectified ASAP. So Google Analytics 4 was released in October of 2020. Rolled out an entirely new model for tracking and analysis. The big takeaway here is it's incompatible with Universal Analytics. So there's no direct method from migrating historic data from Universal Analytics. And you can't really do like an exact apples to apples comparison between GA4 data and Universal Analytics data. So you have to kind of have a little bit of a mental model shift to decide, to basically think about the new data that you're going to get. So in Google Analytics 4, there are a few key metrics that you're going to see in a lot of different reporting. And a lot of it is around the concept of engagement. So basically, Google Analytics 4 doesn't operate under the model of page views, bounce rates, pages per session, time on site necessarily. What they're actually looking at is who are users actually interacting with the site. And that could be something beyond page views. So basically, there's a concept of an engaged session, which is a session that lasts longer than 10 seconds and had a conversion event or 2 or more screen or page views. So it's a little bit of a complex concept. Um, but it's kind of core to how Google Analytics 4 is seeing the data and presenting the data. Another one is average engagement time per session. So that's really that sort of that time clock of how long a user's actually interacting with the site, as opposed to how long they've just been on the site or just had that window open. And then there's also engagement rate, which is the percentage of sessions that actually engaged versus just you know landed on the site and then didn't reach that engagement threshold. So a lot of this engagement is actually fueled by a more robust event based architecture. So Google Analytics 4, so if you think back to Universal Analytics, there were kind of page views, and that was kind of your base event. And then you also had the ability to expand that with custom events. And so a lot of the customization that people would do for Universal Analytics were adding these custom events to track useful things like form submissions or file downloads or things of that nature. GA4 rolls all of that, a lot of those really common events into what they call enhanced measurement events. And by default, these are turned on. So when you install a Google Analytics 4 property, you get a lot of these events just measured out of the box. So file downloads, offsite link clicks, scroll events, video engagement, page views, form interactions. So all those events are kind of out of the box. And the reason those are out of the box is Google uses those to inform that whole engagement process, right? That engagement metric. So these events are kind of baked into that concept. Google also has provided a whole library of what they call recommended events, which you can think of as blueprints or recipes for common events. They're not pre-configured, but they're available and can be used and configured through a variety of means. And then additionally, you can make custom events that are kind of whatever you want. And you can configure these with desired parameters, pass those over to GA4, register the parameters as custom dimensions or metrics. And so really, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of flexibility built in here that wasn't present in Universal Analytics. One of the other big changes is goals versus conversions. So Universal Analytics had 4 different types of goals, like funnel tracking, time on site, average pages per session, and then a goal that aligned with a specific custom event. GA4 doesn't have as much granularity in different types of goals. They call goals conversions, and conversions line up one-to-one with an event. So it makes events even more important if you want to be able to segment your traffic based on certain conversion interactions. Those need to be defined, and they need to be kind of boiled down to an event that can be tracked. So reporting in GA4, Universal Analytics had like over 100 predefined reports, but many of them were deprecated or no longer report relevant data. So it was a lot of cruft to kind of sift through. GA4 provides less than 20 predefined reports, and they really focus on kind of engagement and which events are engaging users. Custom reporting is more visible and really expected either through GA4 explorations or leveraging another product like Looker Studio or something for data dashboards. So you might say, well, it's less reporting. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think it really depends on your point of view. I think it was really easy for people to get overwhelmed by all of the reports in Universal Analytics. So in that way, more isn't always better. Many of UA reports aren't supported by GA4's data and privacy models. So a lot of those reports just went away. And the GA4 reports are more easily customizable, and exploration custom reporting is more robust than UA. So you've got the ability to kind of really dig in a lot more quickly. So one of the big things you probably need to think about is if you had, for example, reporting to your team based on UA reports, you're probably going to need to at least shift that a little bit due to lack of, directly analogous GA4 reports. So, I think it's helpful to kind of understand here's where GA4 is coming from and sort of what the goals are to be able to kind of handle that reporting shift. Few other odds and ends. Universal Analytics had a model that assumed sort of a relationship of a single property to a single website or app. So frequently you'd have multiple views of a single property, and these would be configured to kind of allow you to segment out certain traffic, like internal traffic or traffic only to the blog or something like that. You could do cross-site tracking, but it was kind of difficult to set up and error prone. GA4 properties have a very different model. They're sort of the property level, and then you can have one or more data streams, and those data streams usually align with a website, but could lie with multiple websites or an app and a website, with the goal of having a 360-degree view of user behavior across multiple interconnected websites and apps. One of the big things to keep in mind is GA4 properties don't support this sort of multiple views for a single property. So you have to use a more robust audience segmentation system to kind of get that similarly targeted analysis. So that's kind of GA4. Took a little bit more than 5 minutes. It's a lot of stuff there. But I wanted to make sure that we've got kind of an idea of where GA4 is coming from so that we can know, so we can kind of at least appreciate what's going on with it. Now, when we talk about the basics for GA4 for Drupal, it's really how do you get the tracking code on there? So you have a few different ways you can do this. When you go into your GA4 property, into your data stream, it does have step-by-step instructions for using many common platforms. Drupal is one of them, and on the step-by-step instructions, it will actually say, here's how you install a module, and kind of go through that. The module that they recommend using is the Google Analytics module, which has been around for a while. There's a production version ready for Drupal 9. There's also another module that's a lot newer on the block called Google Tag, not to be confused with the Google Tag Manager module, what we'll talk about in a second. Google Tag is, another project probably worth thinking about. We'll talk about it in a second of some of the details around it. You can add the tracking code manually, and then you can also use like a tag manager such as Google Tag Manager to add your Google Analytics for tracking code. So there are a bunch of different ways to get the tracking code onto your Drupal site. The Google Analytics module is kind of the default, I would say, in the Drupal circles. It allows you to configure your GA4 stream ID directly in Drupal. It allows for configuration of where the tracking code will be added. So like certain user roles or certain pages. Allows some configuration of GA4 events and dimensions directly in Drupal via the module. So you don't necessarily need to be a developer to do some of that stuff. But an important thing is if you've been using the Google Analytics module, particularly if you're on D7, you might need to update or patch to a more recent version to ensure support for GA4. We've certainly run into that. The Google Tag module, again, kind of the new kid on the block, as it were, supports both Google Analytics 4 and Google Tag Manager IDs, as well as a bunch of other Google products. And it supports configuration of multiple IDs and tracking codes, so it's a lot more flexible than the Google Analytics module. It supports certain recommended events. So those are kind of those event blueprints. So a few of those recommended events you can just turn on with a checkbox. In addition to the enhanced measurement kind of built-in events. It also supports custom dimensions and metrics, and has the same sort of granular adding to different content types or user roles that you would expect from a Drupal module. I think if you're going to use a module, Google Tag module is probably the way to go because it's currently backed by Google and Acquia. So, those are kind of two big players. So it's likely that this module is going to kind of stay well supported for the foreseeable future. Google Tag Manager, kind of another way you could take this is use Google Tag Manager, which is a free marketing tag service which supports adding Google and third-party and custom marketing and analytics tags and triggers. One of the nice things about GTM is it gives you kind of an easy non-code way to extend GA4 for implementing and extending different events, either enhanced measurement events or recommended or custom events. It's not required to implement GA4, but I'll be using it for several examples through this session because I think it's easy to convey kind of the concepts via GTM. So it gives me a little bit of screenshots to show, basically. You can do a lot of the same things through GA4 with custom JavaScript, but I am not the person to tell you how to do that. I'll show you GTM. So you could say, okay, we maybe want to do Google Tag Manager. How do you add that to Drupal? You have a similar set of options here. There's the Google Tag Manager module, which is kind of the older module for adding Google Tag Manager. You also have Google Tag Module, which was just mentioned. Again, that can support GA4 or GTM or a variety of others, or you can add it directly to a template. There is at least one case that we'll cover later where adding a GTM container directly to a Drupal template is required. So stay tuned. So kind of, GA4, to circle back, does more out of the box than UA, but there's a few gaps. So we'll get into those now and talk about how we can address those gaps. So the gaps that we'll be digging into is kind of how to track web form submissions in a useful manner. Versus what just happens out of the box. How to track embedded media like YouTube embeds if you're using the Drupal media module. Improve scroll depth tracking. Kind of the enhanced measurement scroll event out of the box isn't super useful from a measurement perspective. And then how do you kind of scale your GA4 management across multiple websites? Because by the time we get through the first three, we'll have a lot of customizations associated with a given website. So you might want to not have to do that multiple times if you have several websites to monitor. So useful contact form submission tracking. So enhanced measurement events, which as we remember are provided kind of out of the box by GA4, include form interactions like form start and form submit. So you can, and those will track just out of the box with Drupal web forms. And if you have a single web form, that's probably fine. But if your site has multiple web forms, and particularly if you've got them implemented in like blocks in some cases, and kind of all over the place, you could end up in a case of what's reported by the built-in enhanced measurement events isn't very useful from a reporting perspective because it's going to have the HTML form ID from the DOM, so it doesn't actually give you like human readable reportable information. So an example from a site of ours was web form submission long contact form node 6 add form. So it's not super great to see that in a report and say, oh, we got 6 submissions to that. So what does that actually mean? So, we're going to do a few different things to kind of make this a little bit more useful. One, we're going to leverage a recommended event, the generate lead recommended event. So to circle back, recommended events are sort of the events that Google provides kind of a blueprint of how to use them. And the generate lead is roughly analogous to a contact form submission. And then we're going to kind of extend that event using a GTM lookup table to match specific web form IDs to actually human intelligible names. So, in our earlier example, the giant long technically correct web form ID would be much more intelligible if it was long contact form. So a word about recommended events. It's best practice to use them where they're applicable. So because it's possible that Google will elect to extend GA4 reporting or other functionality in GA4 around recommended events you've implemented. So if you've implemented these, your historic data will all be already be in kind of this format for these events going forward. Google, the whole model, Google says fine to extend recommended events with properties, parameters that suit your organization. So it's kind of the best practice to, where applicable, use these recommended events. So we're going to create a generate lead event using a GA4 event tag in Google Tag Manager. But we have to do a few things first because Google Tag Manager likes to have things in place before you do other stuff. So if we think about what we actually want to have in the generate lead event, we want to have a form ID that we can actually report on in GA4. So we'll need a way to populate that form ID in a human readable fashion for the generate lead event when it's sent off to GA4. So in order to do this, we're going to enable GTM's built-in form ID data layer variable. There are a bunch of built-in data layer variables in Google Tag Manager, which are basically things that you can track. You just have to turn them on. And so this built-in form ID variable will be populated by the form ID in the DOM, which we've mentioned is not useful for reporting, but it's what we're going to use to turn that form ID into something actually useful for our generate lead event. Then what we're going to do is configure a GTM lookup table to map specific form IDs or a form ID pattern to useful names for reporting. So you may need to use your GTM preview mode or your web browser inspector to identify the specific form IDs or a pattern, because that's going to vary a little bit based on how your site's built. But once you've got that identified, it's a pretty easy one-to-one relationship. And I'll show a screenshot in just a second so we can kind of see what this is. But if you need to do more of a pattern and less of a one-to-one match, and our example we do, you can use a regex table. So you get to use regular expressions to kind of determine that relationship. So once you've got that lookup table configured, then you can reference that to populate your form ID parameter on your generate lead event. So here's a screenshot of GTM. You can see a bunch of the built-in variables. We would want to turn on the form ID built-in variable. And then you would create a custom lookup table. It's good to name it as a lookup, and then sort of regex and name is a reasonably descriptive way of naming it. You need an input variable for your lookup table. It's basically what comes in. And so since we've enabled the built-in form ID variable, that's the one we want. So basically, when this lookup table is consulted, whatever the current form ID is, it's going to say, okay, based on the pattern on the left, output this piece on the right. So we have the pattern on the left, which is a particular regex pattern. And so when this pattern on the left is matched, staff contact will be output as our from our lookup table for a form ID that matches the pattern on the left. So now we've got that lookup table configured. We're now ready to create a generate lead event using GA4's event tag. So it's a very straightforward process. You're going to create a GA4 event tag, select your existing GA4 config tag, which references your GA4 data stream ID. Then you name your event generate lead, add a parameter for form ID, and then select the lookup table to populate this parameter. Once you've got that tag configured, then it will be a matter of configuring a trigger that actually fires at the appropriate time. So if you remember there's web form submissions, but frequently you might have site search or user login or something like that. And those are also technically web forms. So we want to actually configure a trigger that excludes some submissions so we don't fire this off when someone logs into the site or when someone uses a site search. So kind of walking through that, we've created a GA4 event tag. We've named it generate lead, and we've referenced the config tag. And then we put our form ID parameter name in and we've added a reference to the lookup regex name, regex table, and then created our contact form submission, which is triggering on form submissions, but only some form submissions. And we're looking for form IDs that don't contain search or don't contain publication in the case of this site, because we have a kind of a publication view search as well on this site. And once we've got that configured, then you can save it all and test, and then you'll be able to track. Once you've got the events tracking and going over to GA4, you may say, hey, I want these generate lead events to be conversions in GA4. And then also we'll need to, if you want to be able to use that form ID parameter as a custom dimension in GA4, you'll need to register that as a custom dimension in GA4. So to use to register the custom dimension, you need to go into admin, basically go to create custom dimensions, and then you're going to enter the dimension name, which is what it's going to report as in GA4. And then you're going to select scope of event, type in a good memorable description, and enter a form ID as your event parameter. This form ID has to match exactly what you entered in GTM for the GA4 event. Now, it will take about 24 hours for this stuff to be available in your GA4 reporting. So, be patient. And then recommend using GA4's data exploration or Looker Studio to expose this custom dimension in more useful reporting. So a couple screenshots here. So once you're on the custom dimension screen, you click create custom dimensions, and then you put in your dimension name, your scope, and then the description. So again, you know what it is, and then the event parameter has to be exact. So I'm going to take a sip of water, and then we'll talk about embedded YouTube tracking. All right. So YouTube videos that are embedded via the media module that use the OEmbed lazy load are in many circumstances not visible to GA4 or GTM native video tracking. If you're using your GA4 code or GTM container code in sort of the normal places in the template, or the Google Tag Manager module, or the Google Tag module, or the Google Analytics module. There may be some other instances where this behavior manifests, so we felt this would be kind of a valuable technique to store. If you look at the OEmbed lazy load documentation, they provide a workaround for injecting GTM container code, which should also work with GA4 code, into a particular twig template. But if we simply do that and put an existing GTM container or GA4 tracking code in there, it would result in double counting. So you could end up with more page views and scroll events than are appropriate. So to address this, we'll need to create a second data stream in our GA4 property and a second GTM container. So to create a second video data stream, you want to go to admin, data streams, add stream, call it a web stream, fill in the details around the new stream. For this stream, we don't want all the enhanced measurement events enabled, just video engagement. So under web stream details, you'll click on the gear icon and basically toggle off everything but video engagement. So kind of this process looks like this. You add the stream, put your details in, and then once you've gone to the enhanced engagement stuff, make sure you've clicked off everything but video engagement. That way, this new stream is only going to bring with it the video engagement enhanced measurement events. So once we've got that new data stream configured, we're going to need to create a new GTM container. And all we need in there is the basic Google Tag Manager with video configuration tag, basic GA4 configuration tag, just configured with that new data stream, and then all the and basically with an all pages default trigger turned on, because that will carry with it the enhanced measurement events. So once we've created that new container, you need to add it to that twig template in order to test. The Google Tag module doesn't support like a template specific addition of a container. So this is an approach where you're actually going to need to add it to the template file. But it should work fine to add your video GTM container to your Twig template and then use Google Tag module or something else for your main GTM container in the normal way. One quick note, when you're doing this, if you want to actually test this, frequently GTM allows a preview mode, so you can preview things before you publish them. But when you create a new container, the preview mode won't actually populate anything until you've published the initial version. So make sure you publish before you try and test. Otherwise, you won't connect and it'll be very frustrating. So once you've got the both containers in there, you can use the preview mode and kind of check to make sure that things are appearing as you would expect. So in this screenshot, what we're doing is we've got the preview mode here, and you can see we have an embedded YouTube video, and we also have, so the tag assistant is showing us that it's connected to a GTM container in the YouTube video, as well as the one that is in the regular page template. And so when we look in our tag assistant, we can actually switch between each of those containers. So we've got two GTM containers, and then that's the GTM IDs. And then within those, we have GA4 IDs that you can select and switch between. So this will allow you to check and make sure things are working as desired. So basically, to test this, you play the video and see if the video engagement events are being tracked in the GA4 code that's within the container that is within the Twig template. So once you've configured that that's firing appropriately, you might want to disable your enhanced measurement video events on your main GTM container for cleanliness. But that's a little bit, it depends a little bit on sort of how your site's implemented. The issue is not all embedded YouTube videos. It's the ones that are embedded via the media module that run into the embed lazy load issue. So in our case, we actually didn't disable the video engagement for the main GTM container GA4 code because we had also other YouTube events that were on the other side. It shouldn't be a problem to have the video engagement turned on in both data streams, but you might want to, if you only have embedded videos using the media module, you might want to disable it just to, again, keep it clean. So I'm going to take another sip of water, and then we'll talk about improved scroll depth tracking. All right, so GA4 enhanced measurement scroll event fires at a page threshold of 90%. And so if we think back to kind of the point of those engaged, those enhanced measurement events, is really to fuel that whole engagement metric. So Google's basically made the assertion that if someone scrolls to a 90% page depth, that's an appropriate signal of user engagement. But frequently, if you've got a site that has long pages, you might actually want to report and make some decisions based off of other scroll depths, like maybe 50% or 75%, not just 90. So, the default scroll event doesn't give you that level of granularity. And so you can't report that just using the enhanced measurement event as it comes out of the box. But similarly to recommended events, enhanced measurement events can have their usefulness extended by creating compatible custom events. So what we're going to do is we're going to create an equivalent extended scroll event in Google Tag Manager that will fire multiple scroll depths, and then we'll also disable the built-in enhanced measurement scroll to prevent double count of scroll events. So first thing we need to do is make sure we enable the built-in Google Tag Manager scroll depth threshold variable. It's another thing similar to the form ID. Then we're going to create a new GA4 event tag with the event name scroll that needs to match exactly the name of the engaged, the enhanced measurement event. And then we're going to create a scroll depth trigger for a vertical scroll depth set at 25, 50, 75, and 90. These could be whatever sort of suits your purpose and your need. This is not magical. This is just ones that we thought gave good granularity. But it's not typically helpful to set the trigger for 100%, since that would only happen if someone reached the full bottom of the page. And, sites have big footers sometimes. And so it's not probably very common user behavior for users to fully scroll to the bottom of the page footer, even if they've read all of the page content. One little aside, scroll depth is actually kind of poorly named. It's really a % of page visibility trigger. So if 50 or 75% of a page depth is visible on page load, the trigger will fire even if the user does not actually scroll. So we can see here's where you'd enable the scroll depth threshold data layer variable, and then create your GA4 event. Again, name it scroll exactly like the enhanced measurement event. Add your parameter name for % scrolled and reference your scroll depth, the built-in scroll depth threshold. And then we're going to basically set a trigger to fire this at certain places. So we're going to basically say the trigger, we call it scroll depth. That's a scroll depth trigger. It fires when the scroll depth percentage reaches these percentages. And then we're going to save the trigger and enter basically % scrolled as a parameter in the event with the scroll depth threshold as in the event tag. Then you want to save the tag and test in the preview mode to confirm the event tag is firing as desired. So basically you just go to preview mode and make sure you see the scroll events appearing as you scroll on the page. Before publishing the changes to your GTM container, we recommend you disable enhanced measurement scroll event in GA4 so you don't have that duplicate event happening, because that will throw off your metrics. And so you go back to that data streams and the gear icon under enhanced measurements and just toggle off the enhanced measurement scroll event. Once that's been disabled, you can then publish your GTM container and your newest scroll event will begin tracking. It's important to note that after it's published and tracking, you still need to register that custom dimension for % scrolled so that you can report on that and use that for, so you can actually segment by, users who reached 50% or 75% scroll depth. So as a reminder, here's how you do the custom dimension. Give it the name that you want to see in GA4, the event scope, a good description, and then the event parameter has to match exactly the parameter as you entered in GTM for their custom event. So you're probably starting to get the idea now that, hey, there's a bunch of different customizations here. And so you could be iterating on a single website. It can be fairly straightforward, but if you maintain a lot of sites and extend kind of GA4 and sort of consistent patterns, say you've got a large Drupal multi-site, adding sites and rolling out a new events at scale could be time intensive and error prone. But there, this illustrates kind of another interesting pattern that you can do. Given that the modularity of all these GA4 events in GTM is based off of the stream ID of the config tag, it's possible to create a lookup table based on host name to allow a single GTM container to be used on many sites. And each site would track GA4 data to its own GA4 property. So let's take a look at how that looks. So the first thing we'll do is ensure that the built-in Google Tag Manager variable for page host name is enabled on your container. And then we're going to do a lookup table again with page host name as the input, and then add host name inputs and corresponding GA4 stream IDs for all websites the container needs to be able to support. So an important note, be sure to include the full host name. So if it's a www, make sure you've got www in there. If you need to count some variability, you could use a regex table as well. And then once this is completed, you substitute the lookup table name for the GA4 stream ID in your GA4 config tag. And the lookup table will substitute the appropriate GA4 stream ID when the GA4 tag fires based on whatever the current page host name is. So it basically, when it fires, it says, what's my host name? Looks it up. Okay, then I track all my GA4 events to this particular stream ID. So it looks like this. It's a lookup table, input variables, page host name, and it's basically just going to go top to bottom down the list until it finds a match, and that's going to be the output. Then you change your measurement ID and your config tag to the lookup table, and that's it. So I noticed there are some chats. I'll just quickly hit the conclusion, and then hopefully we can answer some questions. So as you probably recognize, Drupal continues to be a great platform for a variety of websites, but GA4, while it's a significant evolution of Universal Analytics, it's not as complete as one might assume out of the box. And you have to kind of do some stuff to take GA4 instance to the next level so you can optimize your Drupal website appropriately. So let me go over and take a look at some of the chat stuff and see if we got some stuff.
So I think I can help you if you want.
Great. Yeah, let's go for it.
So the first question is, does Google Analytics 4 module and Drupal tag module work in Drupal 10?
Yes. I believe they have D10 versions.
And the next question, are federal agencies able to use GTM, which I believe is a yes, but
I do not know the answer to that.
yeah, I know that some of the agencies I work with use Google Tag Manager, so I would say yes.
Most of the people I've run into that can't use GTM, either it's been like a medical institution for PHI concerns, or they're actually subject to GDPR due to doing business in the EU.
Okay. And there is a Google Tag module. Is there another module for Google Tag Manager?
Yes. So there's Google Tag Manager and there's Google Tag.
Okay.
We've used Google Tag Manager and Google Tag. We have had some permissions issues with Google Tag Manager. So we tend to just add the code directly to the template. We haven't run into those with the Google Tag module. And I feel like the Google Tag module is going to be the one to use going forward just because it's supported by both, like it's maintained by both Google and Acquia. So I feel like there are going to be plenty of developers keeping that rolling.
And so I believe Katie asked this question in regard to improving depth tracking. Why not just leave the video tracking on by default? What is the advantage of the twig template?
Sure. So if you, so what happens is if you have the, if you have your GA4 code or your GTM code in your normal location, the video is embedded via the media module. I don't know if it's a JavaScript scope thing or an iframe thing, but basically the GTM or GA4 code can't see the video interactions in the embedded media. Like it's like it's not there. And so you need to add the either GTM container or the GA4 code directly to the twig template in order for something to kind of have the right scope to see those video interactions on that embedded media. Now, again, we've only run into this when it's been embedded media that's using the media module. If you embed directly in a block or whatever, we haven't had the problem. So it's only the media module that's been an issue, which is annoying because the media module is frequently the right way of doing things, right? So so that's why you need to have that either second tracking code or second GTM container in the twig template. And then the reason you need to disable the all of the enhanced measurements in that second data stream that's in the twig template is because otherwise you'd start to get like weird bonus enhanced measurement events because they're going to be firing twice, once in the twig template version and then once in the main version. So that's not desirable. So that's why you'd disable all those. Now, the reason you may or may not disable the video engagement enhanced measurement events on your main GA4 data stream is whether you just want to kind of keep it clean, right? So that you don't have it, the possibility of that. So you just know where the data is coming from, right? I don't think it's really required. I just think it for a data cleanliness thing, it feels a little better to me to have, if I only have video engagement events coming from embedded media, then I want to know all my video engagement stuff is going to be in this particular container that's in the twig template. It makes it easier for me to keep track of things.
Okay, and the next question from Megan is, any tips on setting up a lowercase filter for search terms?
Let's see. So I've not run into that issue. Like, I know that was a thing you had to do with universal analytics. I haven't run into that with GA4. I think what you might have to do if you're getting kind of uppercase and lowercase issues and you just want to only report one thing is I think you would have to basically take an approach of basically similar to the scroll depth approach of create a custom event for the search results event and then adjust it so the custom event always returns lowercase, if I'm understanding what you're looking to do correctly. It would be the same basic model, but I haven't done that specifically, so I don't have an example of that to show. But I think that's the way I would approach that.
And the next question from Jonathan from the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Very cool idea with the use of the stream ID. We have about 25 or so websites in our domain that all do different things. It would be great to just give everyone the same Google Analytic tag. Then we can sort using the stream ID, makes it much easier for us to work with all the different folks that support the sites. Also makes documentation and instructions easier and simpler. Great idea.
Yeah, we did that because one of our clients, they've got about 20 sites on a multi-site, and all the sites are very, very similar. So it was like, it makes it very, very easy to roll out a new site. And also all the reporting dashboards can be, basically cloned at that point because all the custom stuff is the same.
Next question from Max. Does the YouTube module you were referencing use an iframe? Our videos use a custom player with an external video host, DAcast, formerly ZAR. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And we have trouble getting our own data since the iframe loads content from an external domain that we don't control. I would love to be able to ask to be able for us to track video events ourselves.
Yeah, so it's going to depend a little bit by the specifics, and we are reaching the edge of what I as a non-developer can answer. But I'll tell you my thought. It's going to depend a little bit on the specifics of how the video tracking is enabled. I know there's a common pattern for like non-standard. Take a step back. Video engagement events are by default are really keyed for YouTube. There are common recipes that like Vimeo and such provide to track those Vimeo engagement events for embedded media. With the one you referenced, I don't know the specifics. If they have a kind of a recipe of how to track their events, the thing you would do is ask them if they have recommendation or a way to track engagement events via GTM. If they do, then and if you're adding the embedded media via the media module, the same approach likely would work. You just would need to, in your GTM video container would need to implement whatever GTM tags they tell you and triggers they tell you. Just very quickly, the way this sort of approach tends to work is they'll give you like some sort of custom HTML code. I didn't really show any of the custom HTML, but you basically can add a custom HTML tag that triggers on specific custom events, and that custom HTML code supplied by the video vendor usually. I've also seen it for like different web form implementations, like if you've got embedded web forms or something like that. Then that will basically listen for the appropriate stuff in the data layer and then allow you to hook into that to actually send the actual engagement events to GA4. And what you'd probably need to do is then make sort of a equivalent to the different engagement events as custom GA4 events. So it would probably be a fair amount of work, but once you had that pattern down, you'd be able to roll it out pretty quickly to multiple sites if you needed to. I hope that answered the question.
He said thanks. Next question from Nathan. We use scheduled emails in UA to send departments monthly traffic reports, which is no longer available in GA4. We started setting these up in Looker Studio, but I was curious if anyone found creative workarounds in Google Analytics 4 other than manually generating reports and emailing them.
Yeah, that's definitely a thing that we're actually working with one of our clients on right now. They were doing the same thing, and GA4 doesn't have that functionality. As an aside, there are a lot of things where people are like, "Hey, why doesn't GA4 do this thing that UA did?" And there's no, like, it's crickets from Google. They don't care. So what we're doing is we're implementing similar to you, Looker Studio reports, because that provides that sort of scheduled email functionality. The one thing that also GA4 provides, which isn't exactly the same, is you can basically set, I forget the name of it, it's like intelligence events or something like that. And basically what that is you can say, okay, send an email when whatever metric you set is either higher or lower than the average over this time period by a certain percentage. Like, if page views drop by 10%, send an email. So there's some stuff like that that's kind of a neat concept, but that's the only kind of automatic emailing that GA4 provides out of the box. Otherwise, you have to go to Looker for those reports.
Thank you. He also adds, let me see, GA is also missing annotations, which I used to mark and summarize our sprints and what updates were made. Has anyone heard about a replacement for that?
I haven't, sorry.
Any recommendations for separating or filtering traffic? For example, internal traffic versus external traffic, development versus staging versus prod?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple different ways you can approach that. GA4 provides the ability to define an internal audience and define a developer audience. That's underneath tag settings, I believe. And so you can basically use IP addresses to define internal or developer traffic. And that allows, if you just turn that on, it allows you to segment based on internal or external traffic. You could enable a filter based on that, and that's going to filter out in your classic sense, which is frankly kind of short-sighted because you don't have the option of having an internal view and an external view, right? So it's not great there. So most people are looking at using like segmentation or audiences to be able to basically say, this is my internal audience, I want to look at that, or this is my external audience, which is everyone that's not my internal audience. And basically just apply an audience to a given report for your reporting. For production, it depends a little bit on your environment specific stuff. We tend to have a development container and a production container. So when we're kind of doing R&D, we use a development container that's deployed on the development or a staging environment, and then we just copy the appropriate tags to our production container and publish those when we're ready with them. You could also, and we've done it a little bit, you could also have different just different properties and use the same GTM container and use like host name to assign your stream ID. I think it really depends a little bit on your specific use case. If you're doing like a lot of different GTM stuff, the level of overhead to have that sort of host name selection might make sense. But if you're not doing a lot, like weekly changes, I would probably just have a second GA4 property that is the one that's installed on your like your staging environment and work from there.
Okay, and the last question that I see, are there any particular reports you use or create to make sure your stakeholders are getting actionable data from analytic reports?
So I think the most common ones the most common questions we see are one around acquisition. So use like the acquisition reports, and the acquisition reports, there's two out of the box. There's one that's sort of a session-based acquisition. The other is a user-based, which is the tracked first user acquisition source. So those are both particularly useful if you've got good conversion metrics configured. So you've got events triggered, configured so you can actually have conversions tracked. Then you can kind of say, okay, this traffic is doing this, like this is a conversion percentage of this traffic versus that traffic, so on and so forth. So that is pretty common. The other one that I've seen is either like the standard page views reports or landing pages reports, kind of out of the box. And again, those are most useful if you actually have conversions configured. I've talked to folks who haven't really defined conversions, and the reports just aren't super useful that way. Other than that, it's largely what the specific business needs are. So for example, we worked with a client and they had sort of a conversion event on generate lead, and they really wanted to know what sources and campaigns were generating those generate lead events. So we actually did a Looker Studio report that basically said, okay, I want to see dimensions of source, medium, and campaign, and we exposed filters to the report so they could drill down. And then a number of events that were completed, and then we filtered that report to only sessions that included the conversion events. And we had one for each of their major conversion events, so they could kind of see which of their communication efforts were generating those conversion events.
Okay, I think that is all of the questions that we have for today. Thank you so much for presenting on this important topic. I'm sure it's on a lot of people's mind. Thank you.
I was glad to do it.
And thank you everybody for attending. I hope to see you all next month. Have a good afternoon.